You're watching the English newscast here on Future Television. I'm Linda Tamim, and these are today's top stories. Arab communities in the United States are in shock as Lebanese-American Khalid Jabara is killed by his racist neighbor in Oklahoma. Egyptian Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry completes his meetings with Lebanese officials discussing the presidential deadlock with MP Michel Aoun and Lebanese Forces Chief Samir Jaja. And Russian jets based in Iran strike targets inside Syria in an unprecedented move to widen its campaign in the country. Arab communities in the United States are in shock after a Lebanese-American man was shot and killed by a neighbor who had allegedly used violence and racial slurs against the family for years. 37-year-old Khalid Jabara was shot and killed on his front porch in Tulsa, Oklahoma. The family's neighbor, 61-year-old Stanley Vernon Majors, was arrested and he is expected to be charged with first-degree murder later this week. Majors was awaiting trial for aggravated assault after allegedly hitting Jabara's mother, Haifa, with his car last September, which caused her numerous injuries. He was released on bond in May. The family said Majors repeatedly used anti-Arab slurs against them, calling them dirty Arabs and filthy Lebanese. Now for some news in Lebanon, Egyptian Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry has discussed ideas to end Lebanon's political crisis with presidential candidate, Free Patriotic Movement founder MP Michel Aoun and Lebanese Forces leader Samir Jaja. Shoukry, who met with Aoun at his Rabia residence, said they discussed solutions to the Lebanese political crisis in order to get the country out of the current situation. The Egyptian Foreign Minister later met with Jaja at his Mahrab residence. Parliament Speaker Nabih Berri has warned that the country will be plunged into a more dire situation if its political crises are not solved by the end of the year. During his weekly meeting with lawmakers at his Ain Tine residence, Berri reiterated his calls for an all-inclusive solution to Lebanon's political deadlock, including the quick election of a president, which the country has not had for over 2 years now. He was adamant that the parliamentary elections would happen on time. Just a reminder that rival parties have failed to adopt a new voting system to replace the 1960 majoritarian law used in the last legislative polls in 2009. The polls are due to take place next year after most MPs extended their own terms twice. Agriculture Minister Akram Shayib said it was unfortunate that work has been halted at the Burj Hamoud landfill and urged the townspeople to withstand and make sacrifices for the dump to be built. His remarks came as Morkata party supporters headed to the site in East Beirut, demanding an end to the dump's construction. Following a meeting with former Lebanese President Michel Sleiman, Shayib said the government's trash deal was not ideal, but that it is the best solution for the time being. He called on Burj Hamoud residents to make sacrifices similar to those made by the people of Nameh, where a notorious landfill stood for 17 years. The term extension of Army Commander Major General Jean Ahwaji, whose term ends in September, will not be discussed during Thursday's cabinet meeting, while the Higher Defense Council Chief Major General Mohammad Khair awaits one of two decisions that either extends his term or grant him leave from duty. The source said Defense Minister Samir Muqbil will issue a decision on Sunday, postponing the retirement of Khair for yet another year. Russian jets based in Iran have struck targets inside Syria after Moscow deployed aircraft to an Iranian Air Force base to widen its campaign in Syria. The Russian Defense Ministry said the strikes were launched from the Hamadan air base in western Iran. It is thought to be the first time Russia has struck targets inside Syria from Iran since it launched a bombing campaign to support Syrian President Bashar al-Assad in September of last year. The ministry said the strikes had targeted the Islamic State and fighters affiliated with a group previously known as the Al-Nusra Front in the Aleppo, Idlib and Deir ez-Zor provinces. The U.S. State Department says Russia's move was unfortunate but not surprising.
It's unfortunate but not surprising or unexpected. And I think it speaks to the continuation of a pattern that we've seen of Russia continuing to carry out airstrikes, and now it appears with Iran's direct assistance, that at least purport to target ISIL and Daesh targets, as well as Nusra targets. But in fact, and we've seen this continually, predominantly target moderate Syrian opposition forces. My short answer to you is no, it is not, does not preclude the fact that we will reach some kind of cooperative arrangement with Russia, and we continue to pursue that. You know, we continue to speak with Russia in working groups, or via working groups, I guess, about ways that we can put in place a credible nationwide ceasefire, full access to humanitarian assistance, and then again get negotiations restarted in Geneva, and that continues to be our focus. We're not there yet, though.
Coming up next, Australia and Papua New Guinea agreed to close the controversial Manus Island refugee prison camp. More details coming up next. Welcome back. You're watching the 420 News in English here on Future Television. Turkey will grant early release to some 38,000 prisoners who committed crimes before July 1st. Justice Minister Bekir Bozdağ said the decision was taken to make room for the tens of thousands of detentions made in connection with last month's failed coup attempt. In a series of messages posted on Twitter, Bozdağ said the move was not an amnesty and that convicts were not being pardoned but released on parole. Decrees published today say the release will not apply to convicts guilty of murder, sexual crimes, terrorism, or state security crimes, or to the thousands jailed after the July 15 attempted coup. The government decree issued under Turkey's state of emergency allows the release of inmates who have 2 years or less to serve of their prison terms. It also makes convicts who have served half of their prison terms eligible for parole. Australia and Papua New Guinea have agreed to close a controversial Australian-funded prison camp for asylum seekers on Manus Island. The ultimate fate of 800 refugees held in the camp, however, remains unclear, and there was no mention of a closing date. Under Australian law, anyone intercepted trying to reach the country by boat is sent for processing to detention centers on Manus Island off Papua New Guinea or the Pacific island of Nauru. They're never eligible to be resettled in Australia. Some asylum seekers have spent years in the camps, which have been criticized by the United Nations and human rights groups, with numerous reports of abuse and self-harm among detainees, including children. Moving on to the United States, authorities in Southern California have ordered the evacuation of 82,000 people after a wildfire broke out in a mountain pass to rapidly engulf 15,000 acres of terrain. Officials said about 700 firefighters were battling to control the blaze in an area called the Cajun Pass, the latest in a series of wildfires that have blackened nearly 300,000 acres of the drought-parched U.S. West. 2 firefighters were trapped by flames in the effort to evacuate residents and defend homes, but managed to escape with minor injuries. And speaking at a rally in the suburb of West Bend, Wisconsin, U.S. Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump has called for more police on the streets and said Democratic nominee Hillary Clinton is against the police. Trump visited Milwaukee days after the city was hit by unrest over the fatal police shooting of a black man and said initial evidence pointed to the shooting being justified.
The main victims of these riots are law-abiding African-American citizens living in these neighborhoods. It's their job, it's their homes, it's their schools and communities which will suffer the most as a result. There's no compassion in tolerating lawless conduct for anyone. Crime and violence is an attack on the poor and will never be accepted in a Trump administration. The narrative has been pushed aggressively for years, and now by our current administration and pushed by my opponent, Hillary Clinton, you know, is a totally false one. You know that. The problem in our poorest communities is not that there are too many police. The problem is that there are not enough police. More law enforcement, more community engagement, more effective policing is what our country needs desperately. Just like Hillary Clinton is against the minors, she is against the police, believe me. I am going to forbid senior officials from trading favors for cash by preventing them from collecting lavish speaking fees through their spouses when they serve. I am going to ask my senior officials to sign an agreement not to accept speaking fees from corporations with a registered lobbyist for 5 years after leaving office, or from any entity tied to a foreign government. What's happening is disgraceful.
Pop singer Lady Gaga and Oscar-nominated actor Bradley Cooper are joining forces to remake classic Hollywood musical drama A Star Is Born. Cooper, who has been nominated for 4 Oscars, will make his directorial debut on the movie, while Lady Gaga, 30, is set to take on her first lead role in a feature film. Warner Brothers studio did not give a release date for the project. A Star Is Born, the story of a young aspiring starlet who arrives in Hollywood and is held by an aging leading man, was first told on the big screen in 1937 with Janet Gaynor and Frederick March. In the new film, Grammy-winning Lady Gaga will compose and perform new songs. This marks the end of our bulletin for today. Now for a reminder of our top stories. Arab communities in the United States are in shock as Lebanese American Khalid Jabara is killed by his racist neighbor in Oklahoma. Egyptian Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry completes his meetings with Lebanese officials discussing the presidential deadlock with FPM MP Michel Aoun and Lebanese Forces Chief Samir Jaja. And Russian jets based in Iran strike targets inside Syria in an unprecedented move to widen its campaign in the country. Those are your top stories for this Wednesday. I'm Linda Tamim, and I'll see you again tomorrow for more updates. Tune in.